In the Nois Aleph we learned Poda besholom nafshi mikrav li ki rabim hayu imadi. And the Rabbi didn't explain what the Poda besholom is. He explained the meaning of krav. Krav means some close battle. And that close battle is davening. Because in davening a person has to encounter the nefesh habahamis. And the Rabbi used the word al yedei shenefesh elokis mislaveshes benefesh habahamis. It's clothed in nefesh habahamis. We'll discuss that. I mean, we did already, but we'll discuss it more now because we're going to see three different ways of bringing about a birur, a rectification of the nefesh habahamis. And that his slavshus is that his beinunus has to be in things that the nefesh habahamis understands. So yesterday we talked about the fact that the that which the nefesh habahamis understands most clearly at the beginning of the process, the nefesh habahamis can transcend this, but at the beginning of the process, the nefesh habahamis is interested in things that relate to it. So the his beinunus is v'ahavta Hashem Elokecha ki hu chayecha. He's your life. He's the source of your life. And when a person comes to that appreciation, so they develop a certain connection, a certain love for Kadosh Baruch Hu, because they like being alive. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have its challenges, etc., and that there aren't parts of life that we'd rather not exist. But the experience of being alive is something that most of us find interesting. And we're willing to continue the idea, right? Hopefully. If you have any other thoughts, please talk to someone about it. It's not a good idea, right? So that and who's the source of that experience? Kadosh Baruch Hu. So we come to an appreciation of that, and that's the first level of his beinunus. But that's a level of his beinunus called the slavshus, where I have to deal very powerfully with the existence of the nefesh habahamis, existence of the goof, of physical reality, but connect that physical reality to its source in elokus, its source in godliness. That's called the slavshus. We're going to see that there's we know already there's 5 different levels of the soul. That's going to relate to the 3 lower levels of the soul. We'll see that right now. The Rabbi also told us that birur happens, the milchama happens dafkin at davening. Shas tzleisa, shas krova. Time of davening is a time of battle. Why? Because I have to get my nefesh habahamis to agree to tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he likes him. And that's not so easy. Because my nefesh habahamis might be willing to do all these things, but it might very well be willing to do all these things because of me, not necessarily because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? It makes my life more meaningful, gives structure to my life. There's all sorts of reasons why a person might keep Torah mitzvahs. It's the way I was brought up, and it's all I know, and it's fine, and I like it, and it's it's my culture. It's what I do. So that doesn't have a lot to do with loving a Kadosh Baruch Hu or having a deep relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. All right? That doesn't mean it's bad, terrible, horrible. It's wonderful. A person keeps Shabbos. That's great. Are there deeper reasons for keeping Shabbos than the fact that Shabbos is very nice and it gives me a certain focus in the whole week, and a person can explain how Shabbos is good for them? It's good for us. If that's all a person appreciates, so then they haven't yet included God in Shabbos. Again, that doesn't mean they're a horrible, terrible person. Just there's somewhere to go in terms of the depth of that which is ultimately the source of what they're doing in their life. Right? So, but that's very much a function of Islavshus. Getting the nefesh habahamis on board. And the first way to get the nefesh habahamis on board, and this is certainly how every Chabad house works, this is nice, you'll like it. The food's good. Okay. Shabbos in Chabad house, Friday night in Chabad house on campus is a lot of fun. Yeah, 100%. Who's being talked to? Nefesh habahamis. Should I realize that really lurking behind that nefesh habahamis is a nefesh elokis that really wants Shabbos very powerfully? Yes. Even when I'm dealing with that person's nefesh habahamis, I should really be dealing with their nefesh elokis. Right? So that it's not enough simply to give them the food. Right? Yes, of course, give them the food. And yes, of course, Kiddush. But Kiddush is going to tap into something in their nefesh elokis. But it's also important to talk on some revealed level about something holy and something godly, because that is going to affect the nefesh elokis of this person, even though most of my conversation is to their nefesh habahamis. So too, talking to myself. At the beginning of the process, who am I going to probably talk to? My nefesh habahamis. It's good for me. It's real. It gives meaning to life. It gives structure to life. A meaningful life, towards a meaningful life, right? Very, very good book, amazing book. Right? But I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine. We used to learn early in the morning before Chassidus. Did that for a while. Not for so long, we did it for a while. He's in New York and I'm here. I mean, he's New York time and I'm here, so it was early in the morning for him and later at night for me, and that was a reasonable time for us to learn, so we did. And we got into a conversation as to why it is that people come to yeshiva, and why he came to yeshiva in the mid-70s and stayed for 4 or 5 years. I came a year and a half before him and stayed for 4 or 5 years as a bacher. So, and that's what most people did. And we were discussing why it is that it's difficult to get people to do that these days. You tell a kid, even if he's 19, 20 years old, the idea of spending 4 or 5, no, are you kidding, Rabbi? I have to go get a job. And okay, so there's all sorts of pressures out there keeping the person from spending a significant amount of time in yeshiva. So we were discussing why, and this was always a discussion here in Mayanot amongst the teachers. Why is it that getting someone to stay longer seems to be so difficult? And he said something very interesting that we didn't think of. It's often the case of someone who's got an objective outside the box point of view, which he has because he's not involved in teaching yeshiva, and he has because that's his basic personality. He's completely out of the box. So he said something very, very fascinating. He said that years and years ago, people went to yeshiva because they were searching for God. Right? Rightly, wrongly, healthy, not healthy, that's irrelevant, right? But that's what people were. If you were to ask someone what he was looking for, that's what he was looking for. Right? So I asked him, so what are people looking for now? He said, meaning in life. So that's interesting. So he said, well, meaning in life, you can get meaning in life in yeshiva in 6 months, 8 months. You know how to make kiddush, you know how to daven, put on tefillin, you know the basics of having a Jewish life. Seder, so you don't necessarily know things in a deeper way, but the basics of a healthy life you've got. So you can make your life meaningful. Your life is going to be much more meaningful now because it's got this truth that's at the core of it all. So it's okay, that's interesting. So I came to class. Chassidus class. There were about 8-10 guys around the table. This was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I remember some of them. I remember who had the most violent response to the whole thing. Not violent, meaning those violent when he heard these, he went, oh, it felt terrible. So I asked them all why you're in yeshiva. Every single one of them said meaning in life. I said, wow, that's so interesting. Then I told them the story about the conversation I had just had. And one of them went, oh, it's terrible. Oh, no. He felt so badly. Okay, but in all fairness, and the doc is my aid to this, the world that we came from to go to yeshiva 45 years ago was a fairly ordered world. And there was a meaning to things. There was a structure to things. We didn't hold by that structure. But we weren't looking for structure. We were looking for meaning in life, because if you wanted meaning in life, okay, so there was meaning. There was a world that had it was, if you talk to anybody in the world, they'll tell you very clearly what's good and what's not good and what you should do and what you shouldn't do. The world had its head on straight on some level, right? It wasn't as chaotic as it is today. It was much more orderly. So you grew up in a world where they told you this is right and this is wrong and this is the way the world. Now you might not agree with what they're saying, but there is an order. That our generation was the generation that rebelled against that order and created all the chaos that exists now, and it's all our fault. And we should apologize, but what can you do? But that being said, there was so people weren't looking for meaning; they were looking for real truth. Right, which is really interesting. So he said now he lives in America, so he sees it much more closely than we do here, especially living in Yerushalayim, this little bubble. that people are, running around and nothing's real and nothing means anything, so they're looking for some meaning, they're looking for some structure. Some interesting. That was his take on it. But it was really interesting was that every single person in the room said meaning in life, which is why Simon wrote a very important book, Towards a Meaningful Life, because that's what people want. So who's that talking to? That's talking to my Nefesh Abamis. Not that that's bad, but that's who's being talked to. Nefesh Elokis, meaning. Not meaning. One God. That's all the Nefesh Elokis wants. So Nefesh Abamis might clothe that in different terms. And certainly at the beginning of the process does. When we educate our children that Yiddishkeit's good for you. It's nice. You'll enjoy it. Okay. So that was Ois Aleph. Ois Beis. V'hine. Bitter Nefesh Abamis, al Yedei Nefesh Elokis, mislaveshes benefesh, al Yedei she Nefesh Elokis mislaveshes benefesh Abamis. The birur, the rectification of the Nefesh Abamis. The education of the Nefesh Abamis that comes by virtue of the fact that the Nefesh Elokis, that the godly soul is mislavesh, is clothed in the Nefesh Abamis. In other words, we said yesterday, that means I'm misbeinen, I contemplate them. This is coming from my Nefesh Elokis. My Nefesh Elokis wants me to think about these things. That I'm misbeinen in those things that will arouse in the Nefesh Abamis a desire to come close to God. Think about those things. Nefesh Abamis has a very, very sophisticated intellect, extremely sophisticated. It can understand amazing ideas about absolute nonsense or about absolute truth. Depends on what I teach you. Right? Okay, but it's very sophisticated, extremely. It's humans are unbelievably sophisticated. That's Nefesh Abamis. Okay, so my Nefesh Abamis can learn Chassidus and get very excited about Elokus. But that's an Indian Shel Milchama canal. That's going to be a Milchama because my Nefesh Abamis is going to fight back. My Nefesh Abamis is going to want, when it hears an idea that challenges it, it's going to want to fight back and find an idea that might challenge that idea to allow me to be who I, so to speak, want to be, as opposed to what this idea challenges me to be. Very often a person will hear a Chassidish story. There's a very common response, not so much here in Mayanot, but in other places. Right? Mayanot people are open, right? But in many places, people will say, well, you'll tell a story. Oh, that's a story. I'm not Rav Mendel. I can't live up to that. Well, the story's not about you. It's about Rav Mendel. I know you're not Rav Mendel. If it was about, we had stories like that about you, we tell them about you, but we don't. We have stories like that about Rav Mendel. So what's this person lacking? What's happening? What's the dynamic of that response? The Nefesh Abamis is fighting like crazy not to let this story affect me so that I'm going to have to change. So it'll fight back. Right? The Nefesh Abamis will read an idea and find a reason why the idea is not true. It'll look for it. Might not find it, but it'll look for it. It'll challenge it. Right? People, when they start learning Gemara, that's why we don't start teaching Gemara around here until that person's been around for a while. But it's still, when a person starts learning Gemara, so they don't have the bittul to the rabbis in the book, so they might think, rather than try to actually understand the question, they might say, oh, this is a stupid question, this question doesn't make sense. Okay, well, then they go to class and they hear what it says and they go, oh, gee, that's a sophisticated question. Well, the answer's stupid. They hear the answer. The answer's not stupid. Why is that happening? Well, because my Nefesh Abamis my Nefesh Abamis is protecting itself, right? It's threatened, right? Many Balei Tshuva, when they go home, find that certain members of their family are threatened by what they're doing. Right? Not saying anything about anybody, but they might interpret things that way. You have to be very, very, very careful how you talk and how you express yourself, because people, what you mean and what they hear might be two completely different things. Right? You certainly know that. Right? But just klal in life, you have to be careful when you say things, because people might interpret it in a completely different way than you meant it. Right? So it's a milchama, because the Nefesh Bahamis might fight back. And when it comes to the learning an idea, so the Nefesh Bahamis will fight back about the idea. If it comes to the idea of davening, well, we all know that the people say, you want to take a trip around the world, start davening Shemona Esrei. Yeah. Right? You'll end up thinking about all sorts of interesting things and who knows what, and solve all sorts of problems, etc., etc. Okay. Why? Because to the point that I want to connect to Kedusha more powerfully, to that extent, there's going to be a greater force connected. It's going to be a greater force, the opposite. The Baal Tanya talks about it when two people are wrestling. So if one expresses a great, really tries to overcome the other one, there'll be a pushback, just as hard. This milchama, sheyesh menagid, there's an opposition. You have to battle with him. There's someone fighting back. The inyan Poda besholom. So then what's Poda besholom? Because that's what was in our pasuk. We're talking about the milchama so far. Now the milchama was also in our pasuk. That's what makes this pasuk hard to understand, right? We got the idea of krav from our pasuk. Poda besholom nashimi kravli. So the idea of the milchama and the not stama milchama, the milchama up close, so to speak, that we got from our pasuk. Okay, but we also get Poda besholom in our pasuk. So where does that come from? Binyan Poda besholom nafshi. That's not the hislavshus of the nefesh elokis in the nefesh bahamis, because that's an adversarial battle. It's going to be a revelation of a higher level, which brings about a certain bittul of the nefesh bahamis. So let's see what that is. Who shapadia the nefesh elokis. Miagolas, the redeeming, the redemption of the Nefesh Elokis from Golas, from its state of being unable to express itself. Miagolas, the Nefesh Bahamis, the Golas of the Nefesh Bahamis. Ain't about even to Milchama. It's not in a fashion of Milchama. Because it's Poda besholom. Ki'im, shal yadei gilui or elyon, by virtue of the revelation of a very lofty light, misbatli maritzenis the Nefesh Bahamis. They're nullified and subjugated the desires of the Nefesh Bahamis. But shalach ain't tzarich l'milchama klal. Then there's no need for a milchama. So we'll have to see where that comes from. But that's obviously coming from above below, beseder. But what does that mean? We're going to see that's coming from a level of chaya shebenefesh. There's a higher level in that called yichida shebenefesh, but chaya shebenefesh. A place in your neshama. This incredible rotzain, this chaya shebenefesh is the source of your rotzain for elokus, your desire for elokus. A place where your desire for elokus is so powerful that it is mevatel your desire for physical pleasure. You just don't have a desire for physical pleasure. You're just focused on something else. And that certainly happens in life. Does it happen moment by moment? Dafka. But are there moments where you're so involved in some godly enterprise that you're just not thinking about your Nefesh Bahamis at all? Yeah, sure. You can be in the middle of a sugya in Gemara. You're so wrapped up in the sugya and so involved in it that the only thing you're thinking about is figuring out pshat in that Gemara. And your Nefesh Elokis is having a blast. Your Nefesh Bahamis is sitting there going along with it, and it might also be enjoying it, right? But it's going along with it. Doesn't know exactly what to do. Right? Well, because it's bottled to this hour. So at that particular moment, your Nefesh Bahamis is completely on board. You're learning a Maimer Chassidus, and you love it. The idea just blows you away. You go, wow, it's amazing. Okay. What might that trigger? That might trigger a place in your neshama called chaya shebenefesh. We'll see. I was going to talk about it. That can also be triggered by a need for Mesiras Nefesh, which is what we're seeing around our country right now. Right? Unbelievable connection to a Kadosh Baruch Hu because of the obvious choices in life, which is bringing about an explosion of Mesiras Nefesh in this country. Desire to self-sacrifice. What for? For what I hold dear and what is real. But wait a minute. You didn't necessarily think about this or hold this so dear 40 days ago. Well, I understand that, but something happened that triggered an incredibly powerful response from a deeper place in me. So many, many Jews can say that about their experiences in the last 35, 36, 37 days, however many it is. That's real. So there's no battle at that point. I mean, there's a battle against a foe in Gashmis, but there's no battle against the Yetzer Hara at that point. The Yetzer Hara is bottled. As long as there's a revelation of that incredibly powerful inspiration from above. Now that inspiration might not last. And if it doesn't last, so then it's not that the Nefesh Bahamis disappeared, the Nefesh Bahamis just was temporarily bottled, but it will come back in all its force. So I have to be very careful and make sure that if I do indeed experience a certain amount of inspiration, that I invest that inspiration in changing the way I behave. Because if I don't invest the inspiration in the way I behave, in changing the way I behave, so then after the inspiration disappears, my behavior will be exactly the same. Whereas if I make certain small changes in my behavior, make chlotis, certain positive resolutions. Nothing that's going to affect 10 hours of my day, because I'm not going to keep that, but something that affects 5 minutes of my day, why not? I'm going to say an extra 5 chapters of Tehillim every day. I'm going to say an extra 1 chapter of Tehillim every day. I can do that. I'm going to make a phone call, not even a phone call. Phone calls are annoying, right? I'm going to send an audio note to 1 or 2 people once a week who I'm not in touch with, generally, and tell them I'm thinking of them, I love them, and I hope all is well. If you got that audio note, how would you feel?
Great.
Wow, that's really nice. Okay, why can't I do that to other people once a week? People you're in contact with all the time, so then it doesn't have the effect. They're in contact with you all the time. You have to scroll down quite a bit in your WhatsApp to find those names that you're not in contact with. Send a message. Thinking of you. Hope all is well. Things are fine here. Why is a WhatsApp note the greatest? Because you don't necessarily have 15 minutes. You might have the 15 minutes. You might not have the energy for a 15-minute phone call. Should you have the energy for a 15-minute phone call for another person? Yes, but I don't. Okay, live with it. Send the WhatsApp note. And then when they answer, you can answer when you have the time and the energy to sit down and listen to it properly. Okay. They usually answer because they're usually touched. It's a very beautiful thing to do. Once a week, send someone. It's a big deal. 15 seconds of your life, you made another Jew feel good. So terrible. You can do it every day. Now, if you do it every day, you're going to run out of people a little, more quick, unless you have, just an unbelievable amount of people out there. But, okay. Once a week, no big deal. Good idea to set a time every week when you do it, because you're going to forget otherwise. I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow, I love you tomorrow. You're always a day away. Fine. That's how some people relate to Mashiach. She is coming tomorrow. So there are times when there's a revelation of light above that's mevatel the ritzainus of the Nefesh Bahamis. Shalochin, 4th line in the middle. Ein sarich l'melchama klal. Ukemavur b'kama makemis, as is explained in a number of places in Chassidus. And if you look below, the Rabbi quotes different Poda besholom maimarim, because that's where this is talked about at great length. V'gam b'maimer hanal, and also in the maimer of the Mitla Rebbe that this maimer is based on. The birur that comes about as a result of Eisek Torah. There are generally in Poda besholom maimarim, our Rebbe talks about, it ends up being a number of different levels, but 2 basic levels of birur. There's the birur of the milchama, and that's davening, and the birur that's b'menucha, calm, and that's learning Torah. Shehu lo b'derech milchama. We'll explain this in a minute. It's not a battle. That there's opposition, but I overcome him through a milchama. But rather what? Ki'im, rather. That through the revelation of the light of Torah, who bitl ra be'etzem, the ra is done away with essentially. How does that work? So in davening, you have to encounter your nefesh habahamis, and you're sitting with your nefesh habahamis and battling to get your nefesh habahamis to pay attention to the words you're reading. Now, it is very interesting. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't times when we have a hard time focusing on our learning. But when we're learning Torah, we don't find it as difficult to pay attention to the words we're reading like we do when we're davening. Right? I mean, you read a page and you can tell someone was on the page, right? Okay, you might, if it's in Hebrew, that might be more difficult because my Hebrew's not so good. Okay, so read a page of Torah in English. I'd imagine you'll be able to tell someone what you just said, 5 minutes later. Well, what was it about? Well, it was about Yaakov and Esav and the difference between them. And okay. Why? Why isn't it the same as davening? The nefesh habahamis enjoys intellectual activity. It finds it interesting. Right? We have intellect. Humans have intellect, right? So the nefesh habahamis finds intellect interesting and finds ideas interesting. So to get the nefesh habahamis to learn an idea, not so hard. It finds it interesting. Now, it might be drawn to ideas that are less sophisticated and have no meaning whatsoever. Okay, I understand that. It might want to read the fashion page in the newspaper or whatever. I didn't want to say the sports page. Right? Okay, fine. Or the news page. Right? It'll have a desire for that too. Okay, Peseda. But it also has no problem reading something that's interesting and thought-provoking. It'll read an op-ed piece in the newspaper also. Gee, I wonder what this guy has to say. So if you put it in front of Torah, the same nefesh habahamis will find the Torah interesting and learn the Torah and go, wow, that was really an interesting question, an interesting answer. I really enjoyed that. Okay, so focusing on that is not so difficult for the nefesh habahamis. Generally, much easier than focusing on davening. That being said, when I'm doing that, what's happening? You're sitting in your living room. You opened up a Gemara Baba Basra, and you're learning the laws of dividing up a shared space between two houses, and whether or not if you divide that up, are you obligated to build a wall or not obligated to build the wall, and all of those different halachas, and how much mortar you have to use, etc., etc. And you're in your living room where there's a carpet and nice furniture. You've elevated that space that you're talking about because it's now part of the Torah. You've elevated those rocks that you're talking about because they're now part of the Torah. You've elevated that mortar that you're talking about because it's now part of the Torah. But there's no dirt on your floor. Your living room is clean. The Torah has taken that state of physical reality and elevated it up to a place in Kedusha because now you're understanding that physical reality within the context of the will of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you've elevated it to a state of Kedusha, to a state of holiness. So to an ox goring a cow. So the ox and the cow aren't in your living room and there's not blood on the carpet because the ox just stuck his horn in the side of the cow and the cow is dead on the ground. That's happening in the Gemara. It's not happening in your living room. But you're elevating the ox and elevating the cow and elevating every aspect of that reality by virtue of the fact that that reality is in Torah and you're connecting to it in the Torah, which is holy, which is godly. And that's the birur of Talmud Torah. And that's why we affect reality when we learn Torah. And that's why now, right, it's just as important for us to be careful about our learning of Torah as it is for the soldiers to be careful about being soldiers. Our job right now is not being soldiers on the front line. Why? Well, we're not there. For whatever reason. Right? So what's my job? My job is to do what I have to do in terms of the Tehillim that I'm saying and the Torah that I'm learning, etc. That's how I'm going to elevate reality, and that's how I'm going to have a positive effect on reality. I'm not going to have a positive effect on reality by being in a nagmash. That's just not who I am right now. It's not where I am. Right? Okay. Are there people doing that? Yes. Unbelievable Mesiras Nefesh. They're Pashut heroes. They're heroes. They're the real thing. They're superheroes. Okay. And what about us? So we can also be superheroes if we take what we can do seriously. And we can do it. I think we've mentioned this a number of times, and it's a hard thing to live up to, right? just try to make sure that every day you spend more time saying Tehillim than reading the news about the war. All right? Reading the news about the war is obviously something that most of us are doing in order to know what's going on, but it's irrelevant. If we don't know, it makes no difference to the war effort or anything else. Not that it's not understandable why we would want to know. I don't have to explain that, obviously, right? We understand. Okay, but how much time am I spending doing that? Right? And how much time am I spending learning Torah and saying Tehillim to help those people who are doing it really? Okay. And if I'm saying Tehillim for as long as I'm reading the news, so okay. If I'm reading the news for more, so I'm not helping, but I'd like to help. So there's a birur through Torah. Now, you see, I'm mentioning Tehillim because Tehillim is davening, right? But still works. But also Talmud Torah, right? So Talmud Torah, interestingly enough, brings about a birur, and here the Rabbi doesn't use the words, but the words that are used in other maimarim, a birur ba'ofen shel menucha, calm. You're sitting in your house, at your dining room table, or at your living room, or wherever, in your zal in Mayanot, or wherever you are, and you've got a Gemara open in front of you, you've got a Maimar Chassidus open in front of you, and you're learning Torah, and you're bringing about a birur, you're bringing about a rectification of physical reality by virtue of the fact that you're dealing with it in the Torah. And if you're learning Chassidus, so then you're learning about the metaphysical source and the godly source of that physical reality. Okay. So you're elevating it without encountering it. So there's no war. It's just elevated. You actually find the discussion interesting, right? Wow, that's a really interesting question. Wait a minute, I have a chazaka that says he didn't pay, and I have a mali l'shaka that says he does. How do I relate to what? Do I believe this shimon or don't I believe this shimon? That's not an interesting question. Okay, so while you're sitting and deciding that, then it really is an interesting question. And the attempts to prove it one way or the other from our Mishnah were also very interesting. Okay. So what are you doing when you're dealing with that? You're elevating reality. You're elevating Shimon, elevating Reuven, elevating the whole reality of this 8 amos high wall that's stuck in the middle of somewhere. Right? And the wall next to it, even though it doesn't have a roof, right, and the window, and the little socket in the wall, and all sorts of wild stuff that really seems completely irrelevant. Well, okay, it might be irrelevant because you don't have a wall in the middle of your chutzner, but it's not so irrelevant because it happens to be God's will, which is pretty amazing. That's what it means to learn a page of Gemara. Oh. So now the Rebbe says also, this can even be expressed in tefillah if the tefillah is coming from a higher place in the neshama. If the tefillah is simply my body, my mouth, expressing the desires of my nefesh bahamis, so then it's also besholom, it's calm. And that's one of the, for lack of a better word, meditations or kavanahs, intentions, that the Rabbi talks about in terms of davening, that you should see your lips as simply expressing the desire of your nefesh elokis. Your nefesh elokis wants to say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avisim. Wants to say Avos Olam Avtanu. Your nefesh elokis wants to say those words. So say those words with your lips and realize that your lips are simply expressing the desire of your nefesh elokis, and you'll find that davening is less of a battle. Now, it might be a battle to get yourself to think of that. But once you're thinking of that, you can connect. It might disappear. That through a level of love, beyond tam vadas, super rational love that doesn't come as a result of the hisbeinenus, which is what we were talking about before, through the meditation and contemplation of ideas that arouse in me a love for Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's one level of love, which is very, very real and very powerful. But there's a much more powerful level of love that's completely beyond intellect. The mashal for that love is the love of a parent for a child, and a child for a parent. A child doesn't love their parent because they've come to the intellectual conclusion that their parents are worthy of their love. They love their parent because they're their parent. There's a much more powerful level of connection. And even if chas v'sholom, the parent is not a good parent, it takes a tremendous amount to pull that child away from the parent. Why? Because there's such a powerful connection that even though al pi tam v'das, even though rationally that child understands I should have nothing to do with this person because this person is an abusive person, if God forbid that's the case, and unfortunately sometimes that is, because there are abusive people out there and sometimes they have children. Right? Okay. So that abusive parent is the worst thing in the world for the child, and at some point that child, obviously not when they're 3, but they're going to have to make a decision to pull away from that parent. That's an extremely difficult decision to make. I understand, it makes sense. Why in the world, al pi tam v'das, would you have anything to do with this person? Because the relationship is much more powerful than tam v'das. It's not all based on rationale. If it were all based on rationale, the person would have left a long time ago. The person has an abusive boss. Well, that is, you walk into the job, you look for another job first because you don't want to starve. So you get another job, and one of the most enjoyable things you've ever done in your life is walking into the office of this abusive job and say, excuse me, I just want you to know I'm not coming into work tomorrow. You don't have to pay me for the last week. I found another job. And then if you want to tell them, something nasty, you can. Probably, just hold off on it. You don't have to. Right? And walk out the door. And you'll feel wonderful. You'll never think of them again. Pretty hard to do that with someone who I have an essential connection to. Okay. It's l'may l'mitam v'das. So how about our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu? It's also l'may l'mitam v'das. It's also beyond intellect. So if I can tap into that place in my relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, which is very similar to my relationship with a parent, so then that level of love will mamela do away with the negative impulses of the Nefesh HaBahamis. Without a battle. Now, it often takes time for a child to appreciate that connection to a parent, right? Young children don't appreciate it. Teenage children certainly, not always, right? But the prototypical teenager doesn't appreciate it. And then at a certain point in life, someone starts appreciating their parents. With all their flaws, they're not perfect. I didn't know that. Well, neither am I, so I don't know why I expect them to be. Right? Okay, but the person appreciates them. The point at which you appreciate them most obviously, the starting point when your appreciation becomes much, much deeper and much more sophisticated is when you have a child. Then all of a sudden you realize, whoa, they think of me like I think of this thing. Shoo. And you get embarrassed. Can't believe I said that and did that. And okay, say that. That's the way it goes. They're going to do it to you too, so don't worry. You'll get it back. Right? Mark Twain, I just love the line. Mark Twain had, I don't know, the man had to have more good lines pound for pound than just about anybody else out there. But Mark Twain once said, when I was 15, I thought my father was a real jerk. When I was 20, I was amazed at what the old man had learned in 5 years. Right? Great line. The old man didn't learn a thing. The 15-year-old stopped being a twerp and ended up a young adult, and he started to appreciate things that he never appreciated before because he was so busy watching himself in the mirror every second of his life that he forgot to think about anybody else. And at a certain point he grows out of that and he experiences things outside of himself and appreciates it, and then is a different person. So that Ava, if we can tap into that Ava, the Ava of Chaya Shebenefesh, so then even tefillah becomes just a very calm expression of that love. I'm sorry, I'm reading the last line of the wrong paragraph. Chaya Yechida, the Rabbi brings both. Misbatlim aritzonos the nefesh habahamis. They're nullified the desires of the nefesh habahamis. They're not stifled. They're not overcome. Iskafia. They're nullified. Now, that's an interesting question whether that's iskafia or ishafcha. We'll talk about that. We'll get there. That is just a fascinating point. We'll have to get there, but that won't be until Ois Hey. We'll have to discuss that. They're done away with the desires of the nefesh habahamis. And therefore the redemption, the nefesh elokis, mi'agolos the nefesh habahamis, of the golos the nefesh habahamis, who boyfriend the besholom, Poda besholom nafshi. It's peaceful, calm. Oh, okay. So now really the Rabbi only talked about two cases, the two levels, because he lumped the other two together, but we can really talk about three. There's and the Rabbi also didn't mention Naran at this point. There's the level of Padiyah, there's the level of redemption of the Nefesh Elokis from the Golos of the Nefesh Habahamis. That means tapping into who I really am and overcoming conscious me and the desire for conscious me to keep me separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and connected to self. So that battle, that can be a battle, and if I'm battling that battle on the level of nefesh, ruach, neshama, the three different levels of the soul that are clothed in the body and the source of conscious me, so then that process is indeed a battle. And the battle is to be misbeinen, to think about things in a way that the nefesh habahamis will appreciate the godliness of things. But the nefesh habahamis will fight back. That's the first level. So that's called hislavshus. Milchoma. Those two go together. Hislavshus. The nefesh elokis is clothed in the nefesh habahamis. Okay. Then there's we'll divide it into two. Then the Rebbe's going to now also. Then there's the level of chaya shebenefesh, which is a revelation of the ratzon of the nefesh elokis to be close to God, and that ratzon is mevatel, the ritzonos, the desires of the nefesh habahamis, because it's more powerful. So my ratzon for elokus is more powerful than my ratzon for ice cream. Just as an example, okay, ice cream's not the worst thing in the world. Okay, just wanted to bring one that won't threaten anybody. Okay. So my desire for elokus is more powerful than my desire for something else. And then there's a level of yechida shebenefesh, the etzem, which the Rebbe is going to discuss now also. And that's a level where the essence of the soul is revealed, and in that place there is no nefesh habahamis. It's not that the ratzon of the nefesh elokis overcomes the ratzon of the nefesh habahamis, because it's more powerful. But there is no nefesh habahamis, because on the fifth level of soul there is no corollary in the nefesh habahamis. That level of nefesh habahamis doesn't exist. So the person is just completely connected to the Eibishter. Whereas on the level of ratzon there is a nefesh habahamis, and there is a ratzon of the nefesh habahamis. It's just dormant because there's such an explosion of the ratzon of the nefesh elokis. I want elokis so powerfully, so I don't want that. Well, anytime you experience a very, very powerful desire for one thing, so that means you're not thinking about anything else. There might be something that on the most mundane level, a cigarette smoker has a ratzon for a cigarette. Okay, right now he has this tremendous ratzon for, he's sitting and eating chocolate ice cream, and he just loves this chocolate ice cream. It's mamish unbelievable. It's the best chocolate ice cream he ever had in his life. And it's got sprinkles on it, which send him over the roof, because oh boy, does he like sprinkles. And so he's eating the chocolate ice cream, and the only thing he can think about is his desire for this chocolate ice cream. Okay. What at that particular moment is completely and totally dormant and for all intents and purposes doesn't exist? His desire for a cigarette. It's the last thing in the world he's thinking about right now. Why? Because there's this other ratzon that's taken over his whole being. Okay, so now that can also happen in Kedusha. It doesn't have to just happen in ice cream. Most cigarette smokers, Baruch Hashem, I'm not one. Most cigarette smokers say that they don't have a taiva for cigarettes on Shabbos. Not like they're thinking on Shabbos, oh, I can't wait for Shabbos to end, I'm going to have a cigarette. It might be by, this time of year, so, when Shabbos out, whatever, 5:07, so it might be at that 5 o'clock, 5:20 this week, I think it was, right? So at 5 o'clock, they might start thinking about a cigarette, okay, because there is that person that you daven next to Meitzi Shabbos, and they already have that stale cigarette smell, meaning they ran out, said Baruch HaMavdil, and had a cigarette at 5:20 before Marav. Okay, say, well, that's a nebuch. Okay, but they'll tell you that they don't have taivas for cigarettes over Shabbos, which is really fascinating. Why? Well, because they're connected to something else that's just mevatel that type. Even though it's actually a physical addiction, but that too, it just doesn't bother them. Okay. Let's go a little further. Umavar Shami explains there. Now the Rabbi is going to explain the difference between these three different levels we just talked about. Damitis inyan, last two lines on the page. Umavar Sham, Damitis inyan de Poda besholom nafshi. The true expression of this idea of Poda besholom nafshi, who al yedei gilui hayechida davka, is through the revelation of that level of neshama called yechida shebenefesh. 5 levels of neshama: nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. Right? Nefesh is responsible for action. Ruach, speech, emotion. Neshama, intellect. Conscious, you and me. Those 3 levels are clothed in the body. That's why we daven 3 times a day relative to the 3 levels of neshama that are clothed in the body. So we have 3 different davenings each day. On Shabbos and Yom Tov, there's a revelation of the 4th level of our soul called Chaya Shebenefesh. It's referred to as a neshama yeseda, an extra neshama. It's not an extra neshama, it's your neshama, but it's an extra level of your neshama, and that's why on those special days we daven 4 times a day. Right, to reveal, to express that 4th level of neshama that's revealed on Yom Kippur. There's a revelation of Yechida Shebenefesh, the 5th level, and that's why there's 5 davenings on Yom Kippur. Also Ne'ilah. But conscious you and me, 3 different levels of neshama: nefesh, ruach, neshama. That's what's clothed in the body. The first level of makif, of that level of neshama that's not clothed in the body and, so to speak, surrounds the body. It's super conscious, super rational me. What's that? That's called chaya shebenefesh. What's that responsible for? Ratzon, will. Will is not conscious. Right? Will is subconscious or superconscious. It's the part of superconscious you that is constantly becoming revealed in conscious you. You're becoming aware of it, but once you become aware of it, what are you now doing? Thinking about it. Right. That's conscious you. It's now embedding itself in your intellect, in your thoughts. Okay. But before I think about that ratzon, is it there? Yeah, it says it's not there. It's not thinking about it. Okay, so it's either subconscious or superconscious, depending on what it is. Okay. So that is called makif, a certain aspect of you and I that's not part of my conscious reality, which means I do not have immediate control over that part of me. I can't not want something. I cannot think about it, not speak about it, and not do it. No problem. I mean, something might is a problem, but that's my responsibility, and I have the power to do that. You don't want to think about something? Well, first of all, you'd be conscious of the fact that you're thinking about it, right? Because you can actually think about things that you're not even aware you're thinking about, which is really bizarre. Okay, so you become aware of the fact that you're thinking about it, and you say, I don't want to think about this. This is a negative thought. I don't want to think about it, so start thinking about something else. It'll pop back in. Okay, push it out again. You're in control. Who's in control? Someone else. All right. Someone came to the Maggid and said that there's 2 famous stories at the Maggid about thought. Someone came to the Maggid and said he has foreign thoughts when he's davening. Machshava zaros, they're called, right? Foreign thoughts. So the Maggid looked at him and said, they're not foreign, they're yours. They feel right at home. Why are you calling them foreign? That's what you think about all day. So that's what you think about when you daven. Why are you calling them foreign? They're yours. They have citizenship, 2 passports, right? Okay. So another person came to the Maggid and said he has problems with Machshava Zar, so the Maggid sent him to Rav Gershon Kutov in I apologize, I forget the town. He sent him to a chassid named Rav Gershon, and he went to Rav Gershon, and he got there later in the day, and it was starting to get a little cold. He was tired from the journey, and he found out which house it was, and he knocked on the door. No one answered. He kept knocking on the door. He saw there were people in there. He saw people walking back and forth. No one's answering the door. He's banging on the door. So Gershon comes to the door and says, hello, I'll show you to your room. Oh, okay, fine. So he shows him his room. He says, here's this, here's that, here's that. If you want, so I go daven at such and such a time. You can come with me if you want. I'll take you to the mikveh. Just, completely cold and unwelcoming with him. Fine. So he treats him like this for a week. Oh, the opposite of achnasas orchim. So at the end of the week, he says, I'm going back to Mizrich. I said, why are you going back to Mizrich? He said, well, I came here to learn something. You haven't taught me anything. The Maggid sent me here to learn from you, and you barely talked to me. You haven't taught me anything. And Gershon said, what do you mean? The Maggid sent you here, and I taught you exactly what you're supposed to know. I said, what do you mean? You didn't even talk to me. I said, Seder, I taught you what you needed to know. So he said, well, what did I need to know? He said, your question to the Maggid was, how do I deal with the thoughts that I don't want in my head? I taught you a very simple lesson. If it's your house, you let in whoever you want. It's your house. Who's responsible for the thoughts in your head? Who else? Someone else is responsible? You're waiting for someone else to come with a broom and clean them out? I put them in there, so I think about them. If I don't put them in there, I won't think about them. And if the world puts them in there because the world's out there, okay, fine. So I decide I don't want to think about it, so they send it away. You're thinking some thought that you don't want to think about, so start singing a niggin. Right? I don't know. Think about another thought. Start saying over a Mishnah, Baal Peh. Start talking about the Reuven built a wall 4 amas high with Shimon, and then Reuven added another 4 amas, and what? Okay. Now what are you thinking about? Thinking about a Gemara and Baba Basra. Can you? Why not? I don't understand. It's in there. Take it out. Let it express itself. And what just disappeared? That stupid thought. That stupid thought's going to show up again. Don't worry. He hasn't gone anywhere. He's going to show up again. Get rid of him again. Keep getting rid of him until sooner or later he'll decide, he'll go bother someone else. Gives up on you. It's your house. You let in whoever you want. So that level of reality, that's conscious me, and that's where there's a milchama. Okay. Then there's Ratzain. Ratzain is super conscious me, but it's the level of super conscious me that is constantly being revealed in conscious me. I'm becoming aware of what I want all the time. Right? Oh, gee, I'd like some ice cream. I'm fleshik. Okay, forget that. Right? That's not such a hard one, right? Okay. But I became aware of that desire for the ice cream. It was there. It might be that it doesn't show up. So then in my conscious reality, okay, it doesn't mean it's not there. It just hasn't been revealed in consciousness, okay? And then there's Etzim. Now, relative to Ratzain, so there is a Ratzain of the Nefesh HaBahamis. Just like there's a Ratzain of the Nefesh Elokis for Elokus, there's also a Ratzain of the Nefesh HaBahamis for whatever the Nefesh HaBahamis wants. Then there's the level of Etzim and Neshama. And on that level, there's no opposition. There is no Nefesh HaBahamis that's the opposition to the essence of the Nefesh Elokis. The essence of the Nefesh Elokis is that your essential reality is one with God. And you're basically indistinguishable from God. You're a chelik elokam mimal mamish. You're a little piece of God from above, and that little piece is clothed in a body. Ad kedei kach. We've told this story many times here that the Tzemach Tzedek was once challenged by some philosopher. It sounds like they had a relationship, and the philosopher used to like to ask him questions now and then. So he asked him a question. He said, "I think I've got you. I'm going to ask you a question. You can't answer this one." So he asked. He said, "Why? Well, if your God is so all powerful, so I'll show you that he's not all powerful. So I'll show you something he can't do." So the Tzemach said, okay. No. I always get the feeling that it was like, what now? But who knows? But he asked an amazing question. Much more sophisticated than the question, can God create a rock that he can't pick up? That's a stupid question. Yes, he can create the rock, and yes, he can pick it up, and that's just what God's about. And so why are you putting God in boxes? That's just a dumb question. I know everybody gets excited about it, but it's just a dumb question. Because God's nimna ha-nimnaot. He's the paradox of paradoxes. So he can be in space and beyond space simultaneously. The Aron eina min hamida. The Aron was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and it had certain dimensions. It was 1.5 amas by 1.5 amas by 2.5 amas, but it didn't take up space. If you measured from the side of the Kodesh HaKadoshim to the middle, it would be in the Mishkan 5 amas each way, or in the Beis HaMikdash 10 amas each way. And if you measured from the wall to the Aron, it would be the same, 5 and 5 or 10 and 10. But this thing's in the middle. It was there, but it didn't take up space. It was in space, but didn't take up space. And it had to be, interesting enough, exactly the proper dimensions in space. If it wasn't exactly 1.5 by 1.5 by 2.5, it would take up space. But since it had exactly the proper dimensions in space, it didn't take up space. That's God, so don't get all fussy. Okay, but he asked a better question. If God's all powerful, I'll show you there's something he can't do. Can't create another God. That's a pretty good question. Okay, so to speak, he can't create another God. So Tzemach Tzedek answered him, and I don't believe he was saying a joke. He said something absolutely astounding. He said he did. It's called a Jew. It's a chelik elokam mimal mamish. It's a little piece of God walking around in a body. Now, don't get all huffy and puffy about yourself. Oh, I'm so amazing, I'm God, because everybody you've ever encountered, around here, they're all the same. So, it's an amazing story. Okay. So that part of us, that etzem, there isn't anything else. So that etzem, we'll see how that works. We have to stop. Let's just read one more line. So when there's a revelation of chaya shebenefesh, then what happens? Then there's no ratzon of the nefesh ba'amis. Why not? First line on page Lamed Daled, hu rak mipnei she'ratzon the nefesh elokis. That's because the will of the nefesh elokis, the bechinas chaya, that's chaya shebenefesh, the ratzon, misgaber overcomes the ratzon the nefesh ba'amis. It overcomes the ratzon of the nefesh ba'amis. There's still a ratzon. It's just dormant. We'll see. Chaya shebenefesh, there's no nefesh ba'amis left. Okay, we'll go from there tomorrow. I assume on Wednesday we won't have shit because there's a Farbrengen Tuesday night for a Chassidus Kislev, which I'd imagine will go late. Okay, so.